Green Rush, a podcast about the intersection of cannabis, the capital markets, and culture. On a weekly basis, hosts Ann Donahoe and Louis Goldberg of KCSA Strategic Communications speak with the business leaders, financial experts, cultural icons, legislators, and generally interesting people moving the cannabis industry forward. This week, Louis and Ann are speaking with former Majority Leader and Senator from South Dakota, Tom Daschle. Last year, Senator Daschle was appointed to the Board of Advisors for Northern Star, now known as Cleaver Leaves, and has since used his political might in retirement to advance access to medical cannabis for patients across the country. In addition to his work with Cleaver Leaves, Senator Daschle is the chair of the board of directors for the Center for American Progress and vice chair for the National Democratic Institute. Senator Daschle serves on the board for the Edward M. Kennedy Institute and the LBJ Foundation. He's also a member of the Public Health and Management Executive Council at the Harvard School of Public Health and the Council of Foreign Relations. This episode was recorded at the 2019 Marijuana Business Daily Conference, so you'll hear some of the sounds of the conference in the background. Now on to Louis and Ann's conversation with former Senator Tom Daschle.
And we have a unique opportunity, distinct pleasure. We are talking with U.S. Senator Tom Daschle. Who,
so far the rock star of the conference, from what I understand.
Well, maybe exaggerated, but thank you, Louis and Ann. Good to be with you.
It's a
Great
real
to
pleasure.
Have you here.
So you just gave a keynote here at MJ Biz Con. Can you give us a 2-minute summary of what you spoke for 20 minutes about?
Well, I think the essence of what my message was that, first of all, we've seen enormous growth, and that growth in the industry has come about because there's been a change in attitude. And in many ways, I'm the personification of that change in attitude. I was raised at a time when cannabis and marijuana was viewed very differently. It was an era of Ronald Reagan and the war on drugs and, a deep suspicion about foreign substances. That's all changed. And as it's changed, so has the prospect for legalization and the real possibility that we're going to change lives with the applications that we now know cannabis can provide in healthcare especially. That's my deep interest and it's what I care the most about is healthcare, and the opportunities here are just immense.
There has been, as you said, this unbelievable change in public attitudes, but there has not been a change at the FDA. There has not been a change at the Department of Agriculture. What is it going to take for the FDA to start to allow for real testing, real clinical trials, not just at the University of Mississippi, but, at UCLA, the University of South Dakota? What has to happen?
Well, that's a great question, Louis. You two both know the answer better than I, but I would say, first and foremost, the real solution is descheduling. It's taking it out of Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. But even short of that, Congress has now offered many pieces of legislation to broaden the medical research. DEA is finally making some movement in that regard. FDA has a long way to go, but it's going to take congressional pressure. There are now 70 bills pending that would fall short of complete descheduling, but at the same time move the ball forward in regulatory and statutory ways. So I think progress is evident. It's just not as palpable and tangible as I wish it were.
You were in the Senate for a long time, both as majority and minority leader. You look at Senator McConnell, who is now the majority leader. He has never really been an advocate of any cannabis legislation. The hemp bill passed, the farm bill passed, and it was very self-serving because he's from Kentucky. Is it going to be political pressure, looking at a race like Susan Collins or Cory Gardner's challenges that they may have for being reelected? Is it going to be policy pressure? What is it going to take to get McConnell to actually bring the States Act, the Safe Banking Act, or any of those 70 bills that are in Congress to a vote in the Senate?
Well, it is going to take people there's a common expression in Washington: when politicians feel the heat, they see the light. And there's
Does that
the
mean that we
need
should
to
light a
feel the
joint and
heat.
put it right in front of them?
Exactly. There's a need to feel the heat so that they see the light. And I think the light in this context is going to be up to the voters. The voters are expressing themselves in state referenda all over the country. And the voters continue to, one of my other messages today was to this audience was that recognize the importance of engagement now. To all your podcast listeners, I would say that there's never been a more important time to contact your congressman to let them know how you feel about the regulatory and the statutory infrastructure around cannabis. But the more they feel the heat, the more we're going to see the light.
Can you talk about, you've said that you are for rescheduling, but not for federal legalization. That's very nuanced. Can you just talk about why you feel that way?
Basically, my feeling is that we just need more. We have been so void of really good research. And what I want to see is a lot more research. The more research we see, the more encouraged and more confident I am that we can go all the way. But I want to see more evidence. I want to see more good information. I don't want to base this just on conjecture or rumor or some assertion. I really want to see science and medicine play a central role in how we progress. And I think that's going to be possible.
So you joined the advisory board of Northern Swan, which is now Cleaver Leaves. What was it about this company that said, Tom, I can't miss this opportunity?
Well, there are two things. To be fully candid with you, one of the reasons is Kyle Detwiller is a South Dakotan. And Kyle has a photo of me when he was in high school, and I was in Congress. And so it started with that connection. But the more thoughtful and more substantive answer is that I really believe Cleaver Leaves is sort of the epitome. They're one of the companies that personify where this industry is headed. They are very conscientious. They're very deferential to current federal regulation. They want to be compliant. They want to do everything right. But at the same time, they want to produce high quality cannabis and deliver those products in health and wellness to people all over the world. That is exciting to me. That's what I want to see in regard to my whatever contribution from a healthcare perspective I can make. And if I can help them do that, I'll be very happy.
If you were in the Senate today and part of the Democratic caucus, what would you be counseling your peers on how to work with the gentleman on the other side of the aisle? How can we actually get them to see the light?
It's a great question, and I think there are several things. First of all, we've got to stay focused. We have a lot of supporters but few champions right now, and what we need are more champions, more people willing to devote some real energy to this cause.
Well, Cory Booker's been out there.
And Cory Booker's been out there, and for that matter, Senator Gardner has too, to a certain extent, and so we see evidence of bipartisanship. It's got to be the name Cory, right? We really has to. Yeah, maybe that's the secret is elect more Corys. But I do believe that we're beginning to see more bipartisanship, but there has to be leadership, commitment, and champions.
When you go home to South Dakota, what do your constituents, your former constituents, think about your participation? I mean, it's historically a pretty conservative state. I don't even know they don't have a medical program, right? So are people saying,
are they asking you for
like
a little extra on the side?
No, you're right. South Dakota doesn't have a program yet, and I do think that the voters are ahead of the politicians in South Dakota, because as I travel the state, I'm always encouraged by the comment I get, and I haven't seen any recent polling data, but I'm quite sure that South Dakota is no different than the rest of the country. Well over 50%. 62% nationally support legalization, and I'm quite sure that the majority of South Dakotans do too.
Can we talk politics for a second?
Sure.
We work with many players in this space, and one of them is a company called Forefront, and their president is a guy named Chris Crane, who is an unbelievably astute advocate in the industry, and he thinks that President Trump next year will make some move, whether to by executive order to reschedule or to push for some sort of legalization to steal the cannabis thunder from the Democrats. Do you? I mean, you are as a student of politics as there is in the country. Do you think that's a realistic assessment of what El Presidente might do?
I think that possibility really exists. I think the president is determined to do whatever he can to be reelected, and consistency in position is not one of his strengths, and so I think that it's really very, very possible that he could do something dramatic like that. He knows the numbers as well as anybody does. I think those around him politically see the advantage it could create for his candidacy. So I think it's there's a real possibility that scenario is one that you'll see.
Do you think that, I mean, it could get lost too, where this is December 11th, right? And so the Democrats issued, their articles of impeachment. Like, do you think that, this is just an issue that might get lost and the 2020 election comes and goes and we're still literally where we are?
Well, that's a possibility too. I think unless we do get more presidential leadership, and frankly more leadership in
Vladimir Putin just has to tell him what to do, right?
That might be a real catalyst. You never know.
Russia, if you're listening.
Exactly. But I think that what we need is high visibility leaders who are willing to take that step and to be much more vocally and visibly supportive. We don't have that quite to the degree we need it yet. When that happens, the dam will break.
You were in the Senate when President Clinton was president. Why do you think that there has been such a massive change in public opinion about cannabis from 20, 25 years ago to today? Because consumption rates have not changed. Consumption rates are the same, but the public opinion when it comes to legalization for medical is over 90% nationally. For adult use, it's over 60% nationally. But when you polled back when you were in the Senate, it was nowhere near that. What changed?
One word: information. I think there's so much more information available now about the advantages and about the truth around cannabis. I mean, cannabis, you two are the experts, but cannabis goes back thousands of years, and there's even stories that George Washington had
I didn't know that.
Some experience around cannabis.
That's how he crossed the Delaware.
Yeah, exactly, because it was a dispensary on the other side.
So I mean, I think it's more information, more truth about the real value, and I think anecdotally just so many incredible stories about the applications that cannabis now brings medically and for health and wellness. And as that information becomes better known, and as more stories are understood and fully appreciated, I think that the attitudes change.
Around CBD, does it worry you that these products are being ascribed miraculous qualities, and that people are saying, "Oh, it cured my cancer. I was blind and can see," and does that worry you?
I think we have to be worried about the snake oil salesmen out there. That's an age-old problem around all kinds of products and especially medical products. So we have to be concerned about that. And that's why I say we were talking earlier about the need for more research and more evidence and more science. Descheduling would allow for that, and that's why it's so critical. But we have to be concerned and very skeptical about some of the assertions being made.
So can we go back in time a little bit? So you've left the Senate before Northern Swan. I guess what was the time that cannabis became on your radar such that you felt the need to do something?
Well, I served on the Veterans Committee the entire time I served in Congress, all 26 years. And so I've had enormous empathy for veterans and their many, many challenges. My legislation in the House way back in 1982 was the first PTSD legislation that was offered. And so PTSD has been a huge issue. Veterans depression has been an issue. All the veterans challenges, I used to say that new wars brought new wounds, and those wounds sometimes weren't visible. There were a lot of veterans who came back from Iraq and Afghanistan with those new wounds. And the more I looked into it, the more I became appreciative of what those new wounds were all about, the more I realized that there may be a very consequential role for cannabis. And so that was my new awareness, and that's really what opened the door for me to other applications around health especially.
Well, there was an argument made that there's such high levels of use of cannabis amongst soldiers in Vietnam because they were self-medicating at the time.
Exactly.
And that, they came back and they couldn't have access to that, so they devolved to other drugs, and I'm not talking psychedelics, but harder drugs, whether they be cocaine or heroin, but anything to numb the pain of that PTSD.
Exactly.
Because they didn't have access to legal cannabis. Do you think that the Veterans Affairs, this week, and we're recording this on December 11th, the government said no to veterans having access to mortgage loans if they have been found to be using cannabis. What's going to happen? How does this change?
Well, it only changes. The regulatory process is so slow and frustrating. I think the only way it can really change is with statutory basis, and that's why what Congress does is so important. The VA didn't have to do that. I'm very disappointed that they took that step, and we've seen similar actions on the part of FDA and agriculture and DEA. So we've had a regulatory morass for a long period of time that needs to be addressed statutorily so that they're forced to comply. But hopefully we can see more enlightened regulators as well who can press the envelope in many of these areas and don't need statute. It's going to be both, but statute could really make a permanent difference.
I look at what the FDA is doing with psilocybin and MDMA, right? The trials that they are allowing, which are both Schedule I drugs,
right?
And they have determined that both have medicinal value, and you see Stage 3 tests for MDMA for use in PTSD. You see Stage 2B testing for psilocybin for general depression and then major drug-resistant depression. Why are they not doing the same thing with cannabis? What is fundamentally different about those molecules than THC, THCA, and CBD?
There is no difference, and there really ought to be some sort of a universal application. If you do it in one area, you ought to be able to do it in another, and unfortunately, we just don't see that. I think what it is, to a certain extent, is the siloization of these bureaucracies, that one doesn't know what the other is doing most of the time. The lack of real coordination and the real siloization has created these tubular approaches to regulation that just don't make sense.
Are you getting calls from your former colleagues, either for advice or for what the hell are you doing? Or, you don't have to name names if you want to name names.
Name names. Bob Torselli calling you up going, Tom, what are you doing?
No, I've had conversations with my colleagues, my former colleagues, and there's a curiosity. They want to, they're in learning mode and they're in engagement mode. They're trying to better understand what the new lay of the land looks like and where their priorities ought to lie. So there's a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of interest. Still
I'm so
a
glad
lot
to
of
hear that.
information gathering, and I think they're reticent so far to commit, but they're certainly trying to better understand.
Do you think if you are in the Senate now, you would be as vocal a proponent, or do you think that would be really politically tough for you?
No, I don't think so. As I say, the voters have already made clear where they stand. I think the politicians are just behind where the voters are for the most part. They're
Why?
Well, I think in part, as is in my own experience, a lot of the politicians were brought up with that same mentality that I was, that the paradigms around the war on drugs and just say no, and all the well-informed sort of sense about how we ought to approach things is now being challenged, and I think that evolution, that education, is a slow evolution and one that will take time. But politicians are cautious by nature oftentimes. They say that only the paranoid survive in politics, and
because they really are out to get you.
Exactly.
you look at the way that politics is covered by the media today. It is much more I forgot the word I'm looking for. It's like hyperbolic, off the charts. Do you think that is a function of the electorate? Is that a function of the advertisers? Is that a function of the politicians? And what role is that playing in slowing the cannabis market?
Well, I think it's certainly confusing the cannabis market, and I think social media and cable news and everything around the technological revolution we've seen with podcasts are a reflection of the complexity now in communication. It's far more complex. In my day, we listened to Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley, and now you've got this. They were, and because we got our news from similar sources, we all had sort of a collective understanding. Today, you can get your news from just about any kind of source, and truth is just an option. And so because truth is just an option, and because, as you say, Louis, the hyperbolic nature of so much of the news casting is so much more confrontational, I think it's much harder for politicians and listeners to discern truth from fiction and try to figure out and sort out for themselves what to believe.
So this is your first time at MJ Biz?
It is.
Is that right? What do you think is going to happen? What are you looking for? Like, what are you looking forward to?
You're looking forward to at this convention?
Yeah.
Or what I'm looking forward to is really just the whole notion that 35,000 people are coming together, probably with a lot of different views about how these things ought to proceed, with vendors now numbering over 1,300, and I think it's just such there's excitement, there's energy, there's a real sort of a newfound enthusiasm that is contagious. So I think you're going to see a lot of people walking away from this even more energized and excited about the future than they were before they came.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask some questions about 2020 and the election and the Democratic primary. And there are still about 10, 12 candidates in the primary field. If you look at them, I'm not saying who you want, but who do you think is going to win the primary? Who's going to win the Democratic nomination, and why?
Well, just in full disclosure, Louis, I've been a supporter of Joe Biden's. He and I worked together for 30 years, and we had a great friendship and relationship, and so it wasn't a difficult choice for me to make, even though there are many other qualified people. And I wish I could give you a definitive answer. I think Joe, as the front runner, is still in a position to win the nomination, but I would say that I think this is as volatile a year politically as I've seen in a long time. I don't know that there's any real contender who can be confident that they're going to pull this out themselves. It could easily go to Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg, maybe even somebody else we don't know yet. But I think that it's as fluid and as unpredictable at this point in the cycle as I've seen in a long, long time.
My personal belief is I think that I'm in favor of a bloody, bruising primary, because somebody who comes out of that will be able to stand up to Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump himself ran through 16 of the institutional Republicans and just kicked the crap out of them.
That's right.
And he was then able to stand up. And even though he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton and had, he is the president. And I think that the same thing will happen, hopefully, that whoever comes through this primary will be battle tested and be able to stand up to Donald Trump, take a punch and punch back.
Well, I share that observation. I really think it's important that we have as tough a candidate, because it's going to take somebody who is equally as good on the stump and side by side, and that only comes with experience, and experience comes with a rough and tumble primary schedule. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, for that matter, were the beneficiaries of that rough and tumble schedule.
Hillary ran against Martin O'Malley and Bernie. I mean, it wasn't like she had to run through.
But historically.
Well, historically.
She had her.
When she ran in 2008.
Totally. Yes, totally.
So, I don't know.
All right. Well, so Senator, we really appreciate you taking the time. Cleaver Leaves is an amazing company. and we're really, really pleased that somebody of your stature has come out and not has evolved like others who have gotten into the space, but has really come forward and is really embracing cannabis as a medical solution and the industry writ large. And we can't thank you enough for, one, giving us the time, and two, lending your gravitas to the industry.
That's very kind, Louis. Thank you. Thank you both for being such strong advocates, and I wish you all the best as you continue to work.
We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. A special thanks to former U.S. Senator Tom Daschle. His role with Northern Swan and Cleaver Leaves is really rather amazing. As always, thank you so much for listening. You giving us your time is something that none of us here at the Green Rush take for granted. It is the only thing that you have that is completely limited. And every minute that you spend with us is a minute that you could be spending elsewhere. So thank you so much. If you want to chat with us, you can find us on Twitter with the handle @the_GreenRush, or on Instagram @the_GreenRush_podcast. You can drop us an email at greenrush@kcsa.com. We're always looking for guest ideas, for questions that you'd like us to ask, whatever you need. And please don't forget to subscribe to The Green Rush in your favorite podcatcher. That's one take, Shay. One take.